So, as Dr. Isaac introduced, we'll be talking today about innovation management and the discontinuity of the innovation cycle. Very good. Can I manage this? Excellent. So, innovation management, I believe you are all familiar to some extent with the topic or to innovation, right? It is something that implies a novelty, bring something new on the table, and overall discontinuity of something that is out there. And this is what we'll be talking about. There are lots of theories on innovation management and the structural causes of discontinuity. However, I didn't find a whole lot of evidence on the operating causes of discontinuity. That is, what happens in the daily life of organization that prevents them from moving forward, innovating, and remaining competitive in the marketplace. This is what this work is about, okay? So, today we divided our talk basically in 3 parts, with a 4th that is open for discussion and debate. The first is, we'll bring some perspectives on innovation management. In this part, we'll talk about the most relevant, significantly accepted theories about innovation and discontinuity, okay? The most cited authors, the most impactful research work, and those theories that have more acceptance in the organizational world. The second part will bring in technology forecast and technological futures. And that's part of a current research process, a research program in progress between myself and Professor Isaac, which brings an alternative and very significant exponent to innovation management and how we assure continuity from the strategic perspective in organizations. And third, I'll talk a little bit between a parallel between Western countries, especially the United States and Germany, and Eastern Asian countries, especially Korea and Japan, because those are among the most relevant economies in today's world. Okay, so this is what we'll be doing today. One thing I would like before I start is to open this little bottle here. So just a second. All right, so the first part, the innovation management perspective. To understand this part, we have to talk about the innovation cycle in organizations and understand that innovation is not something that, comes up, shows up in front of us. We have to create the proper conditions so organizations can work with it. And innovation is a systematic attitude, behavior, mindset. We don't create innovation. We give the conditions to innovation work, happen. We give the proper infrastructure so people can work with innovation. Discontinue what is out there and create something new, better, more efficient to make organizations work. That's what most scholars are working on, in giving that type of mindset and conditions to organizations so they can move forward in their activities. And remember, innovation is about discontinuity. And why is that? Because essentially, when you bring something new on the table, you are basically taking something old from the table, okay? And this is what we have to understand, That's not fully understood. And why is that? Because some organizations that work in innovation and claim themselves to be highly innovative are bringing novelty into the table. However, they embrace what they have in hands and what they have been successful with for years, decades sometimes, and don't really want to take that from the table. And that leads important companies into failure. Okay? So, what is the innovation cycle approach? The very first part is innovation management itself. At this point, I put a big question mark in my mind. Can we actually manage innovation? I don't really have an answer for that. I heard, I read, I spoke with a lot of scholars working in this field, and some claim, yes, we can manage innovation. Some claim we can't manage innovation, but the fact is we don't have a consensus on whether innovation can be managed or not. I think the most significant research line on this says that we can create the proper conditions for innovation, but we cannot actually make it happen itself alone. How does innovation happen? It may happen differently depending on the organizations. But the fact is, it comes from one mind. And when you have that insight, well, how do you have that insight? You may be alone at home going to bed at night, and all of a sudden you thought about something that you've seen and said, hey, you know what, that applies to a certain problem that I have in my organization. You may be out for dinner with friends, and all of a sudden you see somebody walking right next to you and say, hey, I got this idea. You know, so that insight, that eureka moment, well, how do we manage that? Okay, so that's the big question mark. However, we cannot put it aside. We have to create the proper conditions for innovation to happen. Okay? Next, as I spoke, is the innovation cycle itself. In the organizations, once we bring in that mindset, and once we have that condition that is appropriate to work with innovation, and by that I mean we understand that if we keep doing more of the same, we won't move anywhere. Then we have an innovative cycle implemented for us. And that cycle includes, I will research, I will look out for alternatives. And I'm not talking about from the scholar perspective here, I'm talking about the organizational, from the organizational perspective here. How do I generate ideas? How do I screen those ideas? What ideas should I implement and what ideas should I actually convert into products, processes, efficiencies, and so on? Okay? That's the innovation cycle, and that's where management is focused. Okay? And finally, we have our most important approach into that, which is, if we really understand that innovation is about replacing something existing for something new, we have to anticipate futures, specifically technological futures. And what is technological future? What is technological future? Basically, that is what is anticipated by innovation. Okay? There's some depth in what I'm saying now. Why is that? We are bringing to the table something that doesn't actually exist at one point. And we are converting that into something that we are using in our daily basis within the organizational world. And then we'll be on the edge of competition. Most scholars that work with strategy absorb this concept. Okay, and I'm talking about Mintzberg, I'm talking about Porter, I'm talking about Bergman, about a number of scholars, important, relevant scholars in this field. So this figure is key for our talk today, okay? And we'll be focused, well, we'll give some approaches on the blue square. We'll focus on what happens here, and we'll give some alternatives in terms of technological futures. So, how do we start? Let's start with the perspective and those well accepted or more accepted theories on innovation management or innovation itself. The very first one, really interesting, is called ambidexterity. Well, you may ask, okay, but ambidexterity, what does it mean? Do I write with both hands? That's actually where the expression came from, right? I can write with my left hand and my right hand. That's correct. So there is a parallel to that. Structural ambidexterity, what does it mean? Remember, we are talking about innovation here. And in this context, we do have an organization evolution to a specific profile of organization that basically is able to deal with short-term and long-term innovations, with exploitation and exploration, with maintaining the status quo and improving efficiency, or stepping into the unknown and create novelty, something that is not out there in the market. Disrupting. You probably heard this expression before, right? Disruptive innovation. These scholars, Tushman and O'Reilly, they are from Harvard, and they basically developed this whole approach. What is their approach? Well, nice picture, right? This is taken from their publication, but let's focus on what it means rather than trying to read what is there. What they are trying to say is, we do have an exploitation or exploration activity here that leads to something called exploitation. If we take an English dictionary, those two words may be synonyms, right? However, in this concept, they have to use similar words to describe strategically different activities. One activity that is deemed to improve efficiency, but maintaining what we are doing, progressively escalating towards major change. That's what exploration refers to. And on the other hand, we have exploitation that comes with time. However, when you get to this directly, we have disruption. We take one thing from this scenario and we put something else to replace it. For example, what happens to fax machines? Let's take a closer example, your mobile devices. I would say the majority is perhaps Samsung in here, right? Although some may have Apples or LGs or any other ones. 10 years ago, slightly more than that, there was this Canadian company. Do you know RIM, Research in Motion? Who ever heard of this company? Raise your hands. Wow. 10 years ago, they had the same market cap as Apple. And Apple is touching $1 trillion today. What happened with Research in Motion? Maybe you were more acquainted with Research in Motion's most well-known brand name, which is BlackBerry. Have you heard about BlackBerry? Yeah. What happened to BlackBerry? Where are they? Right? This is a good example. They relied a lot on exploration, and at one point in mid-2000s, corporate world belonged to them. Remember those little keyboards that could send very efficiently the emails and so on? Yes, they gave a huge step, but they rely on their own success. And they said, I'm not moving from there. And then some guy came up with an interesting idea a year later. That was 2007. And that interesting idea is called iPhone. And RIM were never the same anymore. They are still in business, doing something, I assume, but they are not in this business that I spoke. That's why the concept of exploration and exploitation are so important, although they are similar. Let's understand the difference. One thing refers to let's improve efficiency of what we are doing. And another thing is let's disrupt, let's discontinue, let's bring something new. And when discontinuity happens in this case, well, in any stage of this process, okay, it comes in discontinue. If your mindset is not fully devoted to get to this point, nothing's going to happen. Remember, research emotion at this point. Okay? Moving forward, we have a continuity from these fellows. They further develop their thoughts on ambidexterity, which is very widely accepted. And they brought in what is called congruence. And the congruence is basically putting the proper innovation drivers well aligned within the organization to make things happen, to make innovation happen. How do they do that? Well, this info chart here, a little out of focus, explains well what we have. The first important message from what we see here is the function between strategy and performance. Okay? And the organizational structure comes from strategy. This is an important concept. Bergman is very good in addressing that. We do create the strategy and the proper structure to make sure we can fill that strategy. Not the other way around, which is a common mistake in corporate world. Okay? However, what is the congruence they claim? There are some factors within the organization, and they claim those to be the culture, the structure, people, and the work itself that must be well aligned, must be congruent to increase performance. Through performance, we can reach whatever, okay? And that's where innovation comes from. When it's discontinued, when we don't have this congruence. If those things are not properly aligned, those properties within the organizations are not aligned, we'll have performance problems, and therefore not is going to happen. Again, remember research in motion, but we have a number of examples, maybe a little older than that, but very significant in corporate world. One of them that I like a lot is Kodak. Remember Kodak? Eastman Kodak? What happened to them? They once owned film processing in the world. Well, what happened to them? Oh, interestingly, in mid-70s, they came up with digital imagery for hand cameras, mid-70s. And yet they kept it on the desk. They kept on the drawer. They said, you know what, this is the future, but let's keep making money with our traditional film processing. And then a lot happened. Something called Fujifilm came up, but a lot of transformations in the industry. Fujifilm was major competitors of them in those years. And what happened to them in these days? They once had the largest number of patents in this industry, right? Which they sold a couple of years ago for, a few $1 million, but nothing compared to what they once were in the past. And what happened to Fuji these days? Well, near 100,000 employees, multi-billion-dollar corporation. They had congruence. Fuji put those things to work in alignment. And Kodak failed miserably to implement a new strategy. They maintained a focus in the traditional film processing. Some of you may not even know what a film processing is. Okay? So that's the second, important theory on that. This fellow here is perhaps the most well-known scholar. I'm sure that most of you have heard his name. Clayton Christensen. He is from Harvard. And he coined an expression 20 years ago called disruptive innovation. What does it mean? The essence of exploitation. when you move totally something that is in progress and replace by something new. Oh, can the same company do it? Not necessarily. Usually, there's a newcomer into the market. A famous American executive called Jack Welch, a few years ago said, my main concern is not what our major competitor is doing. General Electric. He was the CEO of General Electric. And his concern was not what Rolls-Royce or other major players were doing, the main industries they were in. Was a firm that doesn't exist today, that will have 2 employees next month, but will take over my industry next year. So he was foreseeing this domain of web-based companies and internet and so on. But overall, he recognized the importance of newcomers and said, we have to do something about it. That's why GE remains navigating in blue skies, although faces some turbulence. But what is his thought? What is Christensen's theory about? This chart is interesting, kind of simple to understand, but it explains really well. We have in this y-axis here, product performance. And in the x-axis here, we do have the marketplace, okay? And what happens over time. This blue dot lines here is basically product performance. And if you see this, relatively soft slope going up here. We do have products in the high end of the market, the mainstream, and the low end of the market. What happened to incumbent companies, existing business, like General Motors in Jack Welch's mind? They tend to focus what they are doing higher towards the high end of the market. Why is that? Because that's more profitable. That's what big customers is. That's what the money is. And they focus, they pay their attention in those most profitable end of the market. And don't pay much attention to those customers that won't give much return from that. And that's where newcomers start to play. And those newcomers can threat the incumbents to a point in which once those guys are up here, they cannot go down here. Why is that? Because their setup, their infrastructure, their equipment, their knowledge, their people cannot deal with this. What about the new entrant? They are nimble. They don't have high costs. They have fewer people, but they have means to address those customers that are not addressed by the incumbents. And those guys up here, those customers up here realize, why am I paying X for this company when I can be paying X over 4 for those companies here? That's how those new guys consolidate their position in the market. Apple is a great example of that. Microsoft did that, in the 70s and 80s, and they almost took IBM out of the market, okay, in those days. So the newcomers come in, entrance, disruptive trajectory, addressing the low end of the market. And eventually they will become those guys and somebody new will come up. This is the essence of disruption. Why is that? Those guys are disrupting the incumbents here, okay? When discontinuity happened? Exactly when those trajectories follow. Okay, are you following this rationale? Is it making sense for you? Should I take that as a yes? Yes. Good. Excellent. All right. Next, Pisano. He developed from Christensen. Okay, also a Harvard guy. Harvard guys are important in this field, although I'm more towards the Bay Area guys rather than those guys here. He created this important typology, and he brought in a novelty in terms of typology. I know this is a little dense, But overall, what he took into account was something that several authors didn't, which is business model. Okay, and he created a function between technology and business model. Existing business model and new business models, and existing technology and new technology. And his typology was essentially taking disruptive architecture and routine radical innovations. Okay, if we see this, it's not the case, but what is disruptive? When you have a new business model with an existing technology. What is architecture? New business model with new technologies, and so on. Keyword, as I said, business model. And what is a business model? If you are studying that at SolBridge, is essentially how a company generates its revenues. Is it important? It's everything. A good example that I like a lot, I don't know to what extent in Korea, but is Uber. That's a very successful example. Does Uber have anything new in transportation technology? In IT technology? They use well-known software to develop their apps and so on. So there's nothing new in there. What is the brilliance of what they do? The business model. You got an app in your, mobile, and you've got a whole new financial transaction. You don't have cash involved in your transportation service directly. And user doesn't pay to the driver. And that's brilliant. And overall, how easy it is to get. So they created a new business model there. They were highly architectured on that. Okay? So very, very important. Key in business world is how functional, how effective is your business model. Otherwise, you won't get anywhere. How do we get discontinuity? Well, anywhere here. Basically, when you don't take into account the business model and its relation to technology. Uber knew or knows how to use existing technology and create something new, okay, through their business model. Highly, highly innovative business model. By the way, they are about to bring up and, publicly, their IPO is coming up, and it's expected to raise about $100 billion in the IPO. Figures similar to Facebook 5 years ago. TID, probably the most classical approach. Most books use TID, Bessant, and Pavitt. Pavitt passed away, unfortunately. They created, the Bible. Innovators, people dealing with corporate management, and so should know what they are about. And it's fairly simple. They have this mainstream process, search, select, and implement, okay, which is the essence of the innovation cycle. All other guys use that, and they just brought it in very well explained. And what's the most important? You learn over time. And you know how to do what you're doing, okay? That base of knowledge, and that's the most important feature of TID's perspective, okay? And this is how you innovate. Therefore, you need a constant learning process and knowledge flow in order to make it happen. When we have discontinuity, obviously, when this flow is interrupted. This fellow here, to whom I've got the privilege to be part of the study group, Henry Chesbrough. Probably you heard about Chesbrough. He is from Berkeley, and he coined the expression a few years ago, open innovation, which well describes what happens in San Francisco Bay Area and Silicon Valley. And understanding this theory, we understand why we cannot emulate Silicon Valley anywhere else in the world, because it has the proper conditions there. Okay? Although Korea, for example, is ranked as probably one of the top 3 countries in the planet in terms of innovation, this doesn't really happen openly in this part of the world. Okay, so things happen differently. This explains the ecosystem approach that is taken from Silicon Valley in California. And what is that? It's a funny chart, but what do we see here? Essentially, we see this funnel, okay? It's like a pipeline of ideas. Those little circles here are ideas and how they flow. And what he's trying to say here, that we have free mobility of resources within and outside organizations, from outside to inside, from inside to outside. What he realized, very, very important, in Silicon Valley, companies don't really care so much about having a strong research and development, although they do, very powerful. Take Apple, for example, and other companies. However, they understood well that with mobility of resources, they would be able to save billions of dollars. I don't have a full lab implemented in my company. I need strong research and development, but I can use knowledge that is external to my organization. That's why it's called open. Brings it in. This dot red line here is the boundary of the firm. So you can see mobility from outside to inside or from inside to outside. That's the essence of open innovation. Okay? When we have this continuity, obviously, when this flow stops happening. Okay? So this creates the foundation of what we are saying today. The next step is technology forecast and technological futures. So at this point, what do we understand? We understand the most important approaches toward innovation. We checked on Congruence, Ambidexterity, disruptive innovation, open innovation, business model, etc. We know that innovation in corporate world lies mainly there, not only there. Okay? But now we got something new. We are in a good direction here, but what are we bringing to the table next? Okay? How are we innovating, essentially? Innovation is an anticipation. Well, it's a replacement from something existing to something new, but how do we anticipate that? Technology forecasting. Okay? And this is essentially how we started the conversation. Because innovation implies in discontinuity. Put that concept in your mind. Okay? You don't do more of the same. You're business people here. You don't do more of the same. Otherwise, your competitors will take you from the market. And remember, the competitors don't want to be nice to you. They want your clients. They want your market share. They don't want to kill you. They just don't want your existence. Okay? And that's very important. So, the same process is what happens to you. The same thing is your relation with your competitors. Okay? You want discontinuity in their operations. And that's what we work for. So, innovation implies in discontinuity. The innovation cycle is essentially what assures the continuity. Remember the TID, Bessant, and Pavitt approach? We got search, selection, and implementation of innovation. That's what I'm talking about here. We got a cycle that moves on forever. If that's interrupted, we don't have this continuity. However, we do have that technology forecasting. Remember the word. What does the word forecasting bring to word? What comes to your mind when you hear the word forecasting? Any thoughts?
Predict.
What?
Predict.
Predict, exactly. You were foreseeing something. You were trying to predict something, right? So if you were trying to predict something, essentially you have a trend, you have a technology, you have something that is not there yet, okay? So you got forecasting to foresee futures in technology. We need technology for everything. And look, I'm not talking about information technology here. I'm talking about technology in a broader sense. Essentially, how we use work when we apply knowledge into work. Okay? So yes, information technology is important, but we can have engineering technology, we can have product marketing, and so on. Okay? That said, we finally come to this interesting conclusion, that is technological futures are essentially anticipated by innovation. That's what we are doing when we innovate something. Remember Uber, it brings in a whole new technology in terms of business model. They don't use any novelty in innovation technology. They use what is out there. They just use differently from their competitors. Okay? Who is closer to them at this point? Probably Lyft. Okay? But I'm talking from the American perspective. I know in this nation, we got other significant players for that. But this is key for us. Technological futures anticipated by innovation. That brings a whole new perspective on innovation for us. That is technology forecasting as a continuity strategy. Remember the whole continuity, the charts, the graphs that I showed with the moments of discontinuity? Well, that's the summit of it all. If we don't have technology forecasting, how can we innovate? The big companies, if you take the Chesbrough organizations here in Korea, they essentially work with incremental, sustaining innovation, as Clayton and Christensen call. However, they anticipate many trends, the types of technologies they're going to use. No wonder why Apple uses Samsung components, right? However, Samsung works in a way that progressively moves forward, while Apple comes as an elephant, like a boom. We don't have anything before this point. All that we have is coming ahead of us. It's a different approach. So, continuity strategy. And how do we work with that? Well, essentially, key word here is anticipate and understand potential direction. What is going to happen? But are we talking about futurology here? Well, in a sense, yes, but we're trying to make a science out of it. And there is this guys here. Interesting, this is just a word paper, but I have never seen anything like that. Those guys compiled together the families of methods of how we work with technology forecasting. Those guys, by the way, are from MIT, Firatanol. That's a fellow from Turkey, and she was the head researcher in this project. And he coined this expression, future-oriented technology analysis, talking about innovation business. However, she touched a point that, okay, how can we foresee what is coming up? And she organized all the methods together, and I tried to put it in an understandable way, because I'm compiling something, bless you, a really large, research work in one figure here. That brings what they call families of methods in technology forecasting. So we got essentially 9 families: expert opinions, trend analysis, and monitoring and intelligence methods. That's highly reliant on people and people's expertise. If you want to do something new, talk to people that, okay, at least is in that particular field. Next, we got statistical methods, modeling, and scenarios. This is very common in today's world, and we don't realize we're talking about forecasting. Who has heard the expression big data? Anyone? Raise hands, please. Yeah, that's an important expression. Keep working on that. Good job. Who has heard the expression business analytics? Very good, very good. Also keep on the direction. Those things are very closely related. We're talking about statistical methods. We're talking about simulation. Why companies rely on big data? Because they identify trends. They try to foresee what is going to happen. When you buy something online, very commonly, a couple of days later, you got an email asking, okay, tell me about your shopping experience. What are they trying to do? Be nice to you? Yes, they are trying to be nice to you. But essentially, they're trying to get data, not paying you, but getting that data to process with their analytics system all that big data they have. And therefore, foresee trends of products or new technologies, whatever is coming out. That became a science. And that's vital for businesses today. Moving forward, they have decision economic methods, descriptive, and creativity itself. Yes, you can be creative. Those guys here are more in the conservative end of forecasting, although they are still trying to foresee the future. But essentially, they are making decisions based on business cases, which is important. However, those guys that were more successful didn't really take the business case as the number one priority. And the greatest example that, my favorite example of this is Apple. When they came up with iPhone in a world domain by BlackBerry, nobody told Steve Jobs that said, you know what, there are those guys, and 9 out of 10 corporate people use Research in Motion, use BlackBerry. And you want to step in that? What's that going to cost us? And he said, no, I don't. And I tell you what, I don't want to know. Because if we don't do that, they will be there forever. Okay, so it takes courage to move forward with this. As I said, this is very, very extensive. And I try to summarize with this image for you. You got a lot of description in any one of those methods families, because there are several methods in those. For example, if you rely on expert opinion, which is the foundation of our research work, that's a method called Delphi. There's a whole technique to develop and so on, but you rely on expertise thoughts, people that is knowledgeable about certain things to tell you what might happen. Remember, there's a huge dose of uncertainty in forecasting. Okay? So that is the part that we are talking about technology forecasting and the innovation cycle. Why the discontinuity factor is so important. Now, what I try to do is, in the light of these concepts that we just covered, I try to make a parallel between Western countries, especially the United States and Germany, and Eastern Asian countries, especially Korea and Japan, so we can understand how the innovation process happens in those parts of the world. And each one has its own traits, and things happen accordingly in each part of the world. Okay? So let's take a look. So Western countries and Eastern Asian countries. I divided this part in different contexts so we can understand it further. Okay? And the first one is what is called the cultural context. Perhaps you heard about Gerd Hofstede, which there's a way more researchers working in organizational culture. Oops. But Hofstede is still one of the most influential scholars in this area. He used to work for IBM, and he developed a number of cultural patterns and created an index to measure culture, if such thing is possible. Because IBM, in his days, he used to work for IBM in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, was operating in more than 100 countries, and they were so diverse, so different, and how they could understand the processes in those countries to make IBM more efficient. Okay? So he created the cultural dimensions. And let's take a quick look on that. We do have cultural dimensions in different countries. And in our context, we will analyze what happens in terms of transformational innovation, which is a new word, a new expression for disruptive, for what Clayton Christensen bought us. Remember the chart with the dotted lines, the yellow, the newcomers, and the incumbent companies? That's for transformation. And for incremental innovation. What's that? That type of innovation that happens on a daily basis, that seeks improvement on performance, on efficiencies. Okay? Small changes happening every day. So, the very first one, power distance. This is one of Hofstede's dimensions. What is power distance? Basically, challenging existing paradigms. How does this happen in different countries? First, we do have, for transformation innovation, low power distance, what does it mean? The access to the decision making, challenging the status quo. Myself and Dr. Isaac came from Berkeley, and one of Berkeley's mottos, Haas School of Business, is challenge the status quo. They start everything with that. Remember that? So, low power distance countries, United States and Germany. That's favorable for transformation innovation. High power distance countries, Korea and Japan. That's favorable for incremental innovation. What is most important? Both. Remember exploration and exploitation, or exploitation and exploration. Ambidexterity. Authors, people studying this subject is saying, if we don't take care of both, we won't get anywhere. Next, uncertainty avoidance. It can be translated as my willingness to take risks. And we do have low uncertainty avoidance in countries like the United States and Germany. Well, the United States and Germany is somehow in between, okay? Low uncertainty avoidance and high uncertainty avoidance. That's why there's this minus in front. That means to a certain extent, okay? But high uncertainty avoidance means low willingness to take risks, okay? So those countries are focused on the incremental process. Germany, something in between, while the United States is essentially a risk taker. Okay? And finally, individualism and collectivism. How do countries perceive the importance of the mighty I, the individual in the whole process? Or, what is more important, the collective group, the group itself. Okay? So, high individualistic countries, the United States by excellence, and to a certain extent, Germany. And what is more collectivistic? Korea and Japan. The group plays a stronger role, okay, has a stronger voice rather than the individual. So this is the first context that I brought. Those countries are essentially oriented to transformation, while those are essentially oriented to incremental innovation. Moving forward in this parallel, we have the social political context, which is very important in this world. You probably heard about globalism and how we have to be engaged on that, and etc., right? Perhaps Korea is a great example of how globalism is important. So, we got a social political context. The first approach is the economic system. We do have government-inducted market economy. What does it mean? Those countries in which the government predicts what industries will be protected and will prioritize actions toward those industries. That's essentially what happens in this part of the world. And that's probably the cause of the immense success in innovation here in Korea. Okay? Then we do have something in between. Germany is an interesting case because, you know, it's navigating between dimensions, right? Social market economy. Okay, what is going to happen to society itself? Okay, role for government in restraining market forces and the degree of freedom of companies. And finally, we got the free market perspective, which is essentially what happens in the US. That is, individual freedom within little interference of the government. That's what happened in that country. Companies develop their operations. And then we have this arrow coming from incremental to transformational innovation. Okay? The red part is essentially the transformational innovation. Really important. Let's keep the difference in mind. And let's understand that to have a company properly working with innovation, we need them both. Okay? We are not one or another one. We are something in between that white area and that red area there. Okay? Socio-political context, which is the next. We are still within the same context. We got the legal system. So Germany, and to great extent here and in Japan, failure means the end. Okay? The legal system is devoted essentially to protect creditors. Okay? Laws are more designed to defend the interests of capital lenders. And that's a very different approach in the United States. Why is that? The legal system is devoted to protect the entrepreneur. So very often they do have a second chance. And that's what happens here. Therefore, it reinforces our position in the white and red arrow. Okay? Why is that? If something doesn't work well here, okay, try again. Americans love a comeback. What's an example of that in today's world? Do you know who Tiger Woods is? Right? What happened to him a few years ago? Well, something not so nice. But what happened to him last week? He won the Masters again. So he's up there in media. He's getting new sponsors. Americans like and respect that. He worked hard for that. Yeah, something was not nice in the past, but the fact is, he's the best ever. Okay? And he passed maybe, what, 6, 7, 8 years, I don't know exactly how long, without winning any major tournament. And now he's back. Huge comeback. Social-political context, now the educational system, which is paramount here. So, Korea and Japan, conformity with authorities, memorization, established threats, the tradition is more important here, right? And that's different in Germany, but in particular Korea and Japan, the educational system is homogeneous in quality, is perceived as very high quality. It doesn't happen, for example, in the United States with basic education. And what happens in that part of the world? Before that, Germany, and particularly in the US, focus on creativity and then come to this point in which in the US we will have a focus on improving an elite of thinkers, okay? Highly educated, independent-minded, and creative individuals. And that's no novelty. Why is that? If we take the top 10 universities in the planet, 7 of them are in the United States. Have you ever heard the expression Ivy League and what it means? What are those universities? And the social relevance of the work. Okay? They have together probably half of the Nobel laureates in the planet. And that's something. And again, in our famous arrow, white to red, this bottom part is more towards transformation, while the upper part is more towards incremental innovation. And that relates to our next, which is the corporate environment. And in Korea and Japan, we have a strong emphasis in what Japanese call the keiretsu, and Koreans the chaebol corporations. right? And they are responsible for the majority of works. Companies rely on organic growth based on incremental innovation. Those companies are highly innovative, but how they work? They work one step at a time, gradually, safely, and very, very effectively towards the future. What can lead to transformation, innovation, mergers and acquisitions? Okay, not coming from their mainstream. Germany and the US, standalone independent companies, but most significantly the role of SMEs, which in particular happen in the United States. Those giants, those tech giants in Silicon Valley, they are a unique case in the planet. Why is that? Because companies may, become global in a matter of a couple of years. We got some Kiretsu, some Cheibo. Japanese had the former Zaibatsu companies, right? That have been around for centuries. And all of a sudden, we have companies like Google that's in the top of the list in 20 years. Still in the economic context, we have drivers. Again, focus on Kiretsu and Cheibo, the big companies. Again, the focus on SMEs. And in the United States, again, SMEs, and in particular, the IT sector. And just to close these thoughts, we have management context. What happens in terms of management strategy? In Korea, the combination of product quality, undifferentiated products, and a paranoia about low costs. Japan, the best possible product for the largest amount of potential customers. And evidence is what they did with the American company economy in the 70s, especially with the automaking companies. And in Germany and the US, the leadership and the transformation technological processes coming up in the United States. Okay, and again, our arrow goes from white to red. Okay, so I understand that this parallel, again, I picked up a huge, a very different variety of information, scholars, and so on, and tried to group them together to give you this parallel. That was what I had to say, and I hope you have had a better idea, understand of the importance of innovation management and how we have to work in that corporate world. Remember, you are in business, and one thing that no business people want is do more of the same. Okay? If you do that, your competitor won't be merciful at this point. Don't do more of the same. Innovate always. Thank you very much for your attention.